I'm sorry, Mr. Zorar, but human history is too violent to be real, said Kretir, the Vernarian seated in the front row, casting doubt on the events previously described by his teacher in galactic history class. Silence fell across the classroom. Zorar said nothing, allowing the weight of the disruptive quiet to settle over his students. He held his spectacles loosely in one hand, the thin metal frames catching the soft morning light filtering through the classroom's tall windows. With deliberate slowness, he began to move toward Kretir's desk. His padded, three-toed feet made a gentle stepping sound as his retractable claws tapped against the clean wooden floor. Each step was unhurried, as if he were savoring the growing tension in the room. The other students held their breath, eyes darting between their teacher and the suddenly nervous Vernarian who had dared to challenge the lesson. Zorar's eyes, two luminous green orbs with perfectly round pupils that seemed to dilate in the classroom's ambient light, fixed steadily on Kretir as he approached. The teacher's strict expression was clearly visible beneath his face of rich brown fur, which was neatly groomed and showed the distinguished silver streaks of middle age around his angular muzzle. His ears, tall and slightly pointed, were angled forward in attention, while the rest of his face remained impassive, giving away nothing of his thoughts as he came to a stop directly before Kretir's desk. "And what part of humanity's story, precisely, do you find too violent to be real, Mr. Kretir?" Zorar asked, his voice deceptively soft, but containing an edge that made several students straighten in their seats. He placed his glasses deliberately on Kretir's desk, leaning forward. "I'm quite fascinated to learn which historical fact your extensive research has determined to be fictional." The last word dripped with such subtle sarcasm that a few students winced in sympathy. Kretir's scaled skin flushed a deeper shade of amber under the sudden attention. His reptilian features, a narrow snout with nostrils that flared nervously, rigid brow plates that now furrowed in discomfort, betrayed his anxiety. His clawed hands fidgeted with the edge of his datapad. The Vernarian's tail, normally held straight behind his chair, now coiled slightly around one of the chair legs as he shifted his bipedal form uncomfortably. I mean no disrespect, Professor," he stammered, the scales along his neck flattening with his agitation. It's just that, Kretir continued, finding his voice, though still stumbling over his words. "It's difficult enough to believe that humans weaponized nearly every technological advancement they ever made. But what's truly impossible to accept is that they lived for centuries under constant threat of mutual assured destruction." His scaled fingers spread in a gesture of incredulity. "Whole civilizations, existing day after day, knowing they could be vaporized at any moment. No species could endure such psychological torment without, breaking." "Kretir's right," came a melodious voice from the back of the classroom. Grader, a third student with a sleek coat of black that coexisted with distinctive white spots, leaned forward in her seat. Her long, sinuous tail swished thoughtfully behind her as she spoke, and her hands gestured animatedly. "Professor, you've taught us about natural selection and evolutionary psychology. How could any species evolve to create weapons that could destroy their entire planet, and then just live with them?" Her blue eyes, far more vibrant than any in the room, conveyed a genuine puzzlement. "It goes against all logic of self-preservation." Zorar stepped back from Kretir's desk, retrieving his glasses and placing them back on his snout, before turning to face the entire class. "Is this a consensus view? Do others share this skepticism about humanity's historical record?" he asked, his tone now more curious than challenging.
"I do,"
chirped Lotharo, an avian student near the windows. His emerald feathers ruffled slightly as he spoke, the brilliant crest on his head rising with his excitement.
"The historical accounts suggest humans fought against their own kind constantly. Not just different nations or tribes, but within their own societies."
His dark, beady eyes blinked rapidly.
"Even the most territorial species we know have better cooperation instincts than that. What you've taught us about their history can't be right." "And they've never stopped,"
added Suli, another avian of the same species seated beside Lotharo. Her own green plumage was slightly darker, but she shed the same expressive crest and intelligent dark eyes.
"According to the texts, even as they developed more advanced technologies, they adapted them for warfare first. It seems evolutionarily counterproductive. No species could advance technologically while being so fundamentally self-destructive."
A collective murmur of agreement spread through the classroom. Zora noted the nodding heads, the exchanged glances, the datapads being tapped as students shared notes and theories. No one seemed willing to accept the historical record of humanity as he had presented it. Even his usually quiet students were whispering to their neighbors, clearly invested in this question of human history's plausibility. Zora moved to the center of the classroom, his posture straightening as he prepared to address this collective doubt. He tapped a control on his wrist device, and the room's lighting shifted subtly, focusing attention toward him while the holographic display behind him finally activated, showing the blue-green sphere of Earth. "Your skepticism is understandable," Zora began, his voice taking on the resonant quality that had made him a renowned lecturer at the Academy. "To comprehend humanity, you must first understand the crucible that forged them, Earth." The holographic planet rotated steadily behind him, highlighting various geographical features as he spoke. "Unlike many homeworlds, Earth was uniquely hostile. Its gravity was punishing. Its atmospheric oxygen levels produced frequent natural fires, and its tectonic activity created constant geological instability." The hologram shifted to show primitive humans, small and vulnerable against the backdrop of prowling predators. Early humans were not the apex predators of their world. They possessed neither natural armor like the Vernarians, nor the speed of the Felicians, nor the flight capabilities of the Avaros. They were soft-skinned, relatively weak, and painfully vulnerable. Zora paced deliberately, the tap of his claws punctuating his words. Their survival tool, their only real advantage, was their brain's capacity for pattern recognition, tool use, and, most importantly, coordinated violence. The hologram shifted to show primitive humans hunting in groups, using simple weapons against larger creatures. They did not evolve to be peaceful gatherers. They evolved to be cooperative hunters and warfare specialists. Every technological advance served this evolutionary imperative. Some students were taking notes now, their initial skepticism giving way to interest as Zora continued. Their tribal period was marked by constant small-scale conflicts over resources, water, food, shelter, on Earth. These were often scarce and unevenly distributed. Unlike many of your homeworlds, Earth demanded competition. The hologram showed small bands of humans engaging in primitive warfare. When the first human civilizations emerged in river valleys, the Nile, the Tigris-Euphrates, the Indus, the Yellow River, they immediately began organizing for more efficient warfare. The display shifted to show ancient armies with standardized weapons, marching in formation. The very concept of the state in human development was inseparable from organized violence. Their earliest written records are often inventories of weapons, soldiers, and conquered territories. Kretir raised a scaled hand.
But, Professor, couldn't they have evolved beyond these instincts once basic survival was assured?
An excellent question, Zora acknowledged. The peculiar tragedy of humanity is that their intelligence outpaced their biological evolution. Their brains remained wired for tribal conflict, even as their technology created global connections. The hologram showed the expanding networks of ancient trade routes. Their empires, Roman, Han, Mongol, Ottoman, British, were all built through strategic application of violence, yet also created unprecedented periods of relative stability within their borders. Grader's tail swished thoughtfully.
So their aggression was also their path to cooperation?
Undoubtedly. Zora's ears perked up with approval. Their greatest military innovations often came from organizing humans more efficiently, not just creating deadlier weapons. The display showed the phalanx formations of Greeks, the disciplined legions of Romans, the mounted archers of the Mongols. Each of these represented a social technology as much as a military one. For nearly 30 minutes, Zora guided them through humanity's bloody early history. He explained how conflict drove innovation, how irrigation systems were built to feed armies, how metallurgy advanced to create better weapons, how mathematics developed to calculate trajectories and build fortifications. The students watched, some with fascination, others with horror, as the holographic display showed the rise and fall of civilizations through conquest and collapse. "Consider the development of iron," Zora said, as the hologram displayed ancient smiths hammering glowing metal. The ability to create iron weapons gave certain human societies overwhelming advantages. The Hittites, the Assyrians, and later Romans all leveraged iron technology for conquest. But the same metallurgical knowledge that produced swords also created plows, making agriculture more efficient. Lotharo's crest flattened in confusion.
So, they developed beneficial technologies because of warfare?
Often, yes, Zora confirmed. Their medical knowledge advanced significantly during wars. Techniques for surgery, amputation, pain management, and preventing infection were all refined on battlefields. Their understanding of chemistry was accelerated by the search for better explosives. Even their early aviation experiments were quickly adapted for military reconnaissance and bombing. Suli chirped softly.
It's as if violence was their primary motivator for progress.
Not the only one, Zora clarified, but a consistent accelerant. Trade, curiosity, and survival needs also drove innovation. But nothing concentrated human resources and focus like the threat of annihilation by rival groups. The professor paused before a display showing ancient walled cities. Look at these fortifications. Humans invested enormous resources in walls, moats, and defensive structures. The engineering principles developed for military protection later enabled their greatest architectural achievements. Bridges, aqueducts, cathedrals, violence, and creation were inextricably linked in human development. Grader's spotted tail swished with interest.
Did they ever try to break this cycle?
Constantly, Zora replied, his green eyes somber. Throughout their history, humans created philosophical systems, religious traditions, and political structures aimed at reducing violence. They established laws of warfare, conventions for treating prisoners, and, eventually, international organizations dedicated to peace. Yet these very institutions arose from the ashes of their most destructive conflicts. That was when everything changed, Zora said, his voice dropping dramatically as the holographic display shifted to show a simple black powder explosion. When humans discovered how to harness chemical energy for warfare, the display showed the evolution of gunpowder weapons, from simple fire lances to cannons to muskets. For the first time, a relatively untrained human could kill a highly trained warrior with the pull of a trigger. The democratization of lethal force restructured human societies fundamentally. Suli's feathered crest rose in alarm.
They put such weapons in the hands of ordinary citizens?
Different human societies handled this differently, Zora explained, showing contrasting images of Japanese samurai, European knights, and American colonists. Some restricted firearms to elite warriors, others made them widely available. These choices shaped their political structures for centuries afterward. Zora moved closer to the display as it showed naval warfare evolving, from simple boarding actions to fleets that could bombard coastal cities from beyond the horizon. By the 17th century, humans had developed the concept of the ship of the line, massive wooden vessels with up to 120 cannons arranged on multiple decks. These ships could unleash broadsides capable of devastating other ships or shoreline fortifications.
They fought on water?
Kratir asked, his scaled brow furrowing. They did, and still do, Zora confirmed. Control of shipping routes and maritime resources was crucial to many human empires. Their naval technologies, from navigation instruments to hull designs to propulsion systems, advanced rapidly due to military competition. The display shifted to show colonization, European ships arriving on distant shores, the establishment of colonies, and the violent subjugation of indigenous populations. This period saw unprecedented expansion of certain human powers across their planet. Spanish, Portuguese, Dutch, French, and British empires established global networks of controlled territories, often through brutal conquest and exploitation. Grada's ears flattened against her spotted head.
They conquered their own kind?
Continually, Zora said. Human history is largely a record of conquest, resistance, assimilation, and further conquest. The technologies and organizational systems that enabled effective violence usually determined which societies dominated. The holographic display now showed the evolution of firearms, becoming smaller, more reliable, more deadly. Alongside these images were scenes of expanding human empires, ships crossing oceans, and the beginnings of industrial machinery. By the dawn of their industrial age, humans had created weapons capable of killing dozens of individuals in minutes. Their naval ships could destroy coastal cities from beyond the horizon, and they were just getting started. Zora paced slowly across the front of the classroom, his claws pressing against the floor. The Industrial Revolution fundamentally transformed warfare, as it did all aspects of human civilization. Mass production meant mass armies with standardized equipment. Chemical advancements led to more powerful explosives. Improved metallurgy created more deadly projectiles and eventually fully automatic weapons. The display showed early factories, smoke billowing from countless chimneys as cities expanded rapidly. Human population grew exponentially during this period, providing more soldiers for increasingly large armies. Transportation networks, first canals, then railways, allowed rapid deployment of troops and supplies across vast distances. Telegraphic communications enabled coordinated military actions across hundreds of kilometers. The 19th century saw warfare become increasingly lethal and organized. The American Civil War demonstrated the deadly side of industrial warfare. Rifled artillery, mass-produced firearms, ironclad warships, and even primitive submarines all made their appearance. More than 600,000 humans died in that internal conflict alone. Kratir's scaled skin paled slightly.
An internal conflict killed that many?
And it was far from their most deadly, Zora replied solemnly. As industrial capabilities spread across human nations, military competition intensified. European powers developed colonial empires spanning the planet, often coming into conflict as they expanded. Arms races accelerated technological development as nations sought advantages. The display shifted to show progressively more deadly weapons, machine guns, high-explosive artillery shells, early tanks, and submarines. By the late 19th century, human warfare had reached unprecedented levels of destructive potential. The invention of dynamite and other high explosives multiplied killing power exponentially. The machine gun could cut down hundreds of soldiers in minutes. Suli's green feathers ruffled with distress.
And still they continued developing more weapons?
The cycle repeated itself, as always, Zora confirmed. Military necessity drove scientific research. Chemistry advanced through the search for better explosives, and later, poison gases. Physics progressed partially through ballistics research. Metallurgy improved to create better armor and projectiles. Medical science advanced through treating combat wounds. Even food preservation technologies developed significantly to supply massive armies. The display shifted to an image of an early airplane flying over a European battlefield. In 1914, human civilization reached a breaking point, Zora said, his voice growing grave. What began as a regional conflict in Europe, triggered by the assassination of a single political figure, cascaded into what humans would call the First World War. The hologram expanded to show trench warfare, gas attacks, and early tank battles. For the first time, the full might of industrialized nations was turned toward a single purpose: the systematic destruction of enemy forces and resources. Over 16 million deaths resulted from this conflict, which engulfed much of their planet. Zora paused, allowing the students to absorb the magnitude of what they were seeing. Then he tapped his wrist device again, and the hologram shifted to show the devastation of Hiroshima, a city reduced to ash and rubble in seconds. This, he said quietly, was the result of a single bomb dropped during their Second World War, just a few decades after the first. The first crude version of what would become weapons capable of destroying their entire civilization. Grayder's spotted fur bristled with horror.
And they kept making these weapons?
They did, Zora confirmed. They made them by the thousands, each one hundreds of times more powerful than what you see here. For centuries, the major powers on Earth lived with what they called mutual assured destruction, the knowledge that launching these weapons would trigger an automatic response that would destroy both sides completely. A stunned silence fell over the classroom. Even the most skeptical students now seemed transfixed by the holographic images, trying to comprehend the incomprehensible. Kratir's voice was barely audible when he finally spoke.
Professor, how could any species live like that? How could they wake each day, knowing everything could end in an instant? How could they build families, create art, advance science,
All while living under such a shadow? Zora looked at Kretir, the question hanging in the air between them. Before he could answer, Lotharo's voice cut through the silence.
And why didn't they use these weapons? There must have been moments of crisis or of miscalculation. How did they avoid the inevitable?
An excellent question, Zora began, moving back toward the center of the room. The history of how humans managed to live with, and eventually move beyond, the constant threat of mutual assured destruction by their own hands is perhaps the most remarkable aspect of their story. It begins with their first contact with the Galactic Council, and the realization that the time to point weapons at themselves was over. The holographic display shifted to show Earth against the backdrop of stars. A new image appeared, a peculiar geometric pattern of light hovering above a human radio telescope array. It happened decades after what humans called their Cold War, Zora continued. Their most advanced radio telescopes detected an encrypted signal, a mathematical sequence impossible to occur naturally. After 3 years of analysis, they determined it wasn't random noise, but a deliberate communication from beyond their solar system. The hologram showed humans gathered around primitive computer screens, their faces illuminated by the glow of monitors displaying complex equations and patterns. The Galactic Council broadcast its presence with the schematics of FTL comms as the means of recruiting new members. When human scientists finally cracked the basic encryption of the signal, it established the first faster-than-light communication between Earth and the wider galaxy. Graders spotted tails swished with interest.
When first contact happened, was the Council worried that the humans would become a threat?
Not just that, Zora replied. The Council was concerned that a species capable of reaching space, while still locked in tribal conflicts, might pose a danger to established galactic peace. The initial message was carefully crafted, not revealing too much technology, but making it undeniably clear that humans were not alone. The display showed massive crowds gathering in human cities, their faces turned upward toward the sky. The psychological impact was profound. Almost overnight, humans realized their petty divisions were meaningless against the potential threat of a populated galaxy. Religious frameworks were challenged, political boundaries seemed suddenly arbitrary, and most importantly, nuclear weapons pointed at each other became recognized as the evolutionary dead end they were. Zora's ears tensed, showing his focus on the explanation. Within a decade of first contact, human nations had already begun the process of removing nuclear weapons from their planet, not destroying them, but repositioning them. The arrangement was focused on the construction of their first orbital defense platforms. The hologram showed massive rockets launching from Earth, carrying bulky payloads into orbit. Then it displayed the early orbital defense grid taking shape around the planet. Rather than destroying their weapons, humans redirected them outward, creating a planetary defense grid that would make any invasion attempt prohibitively costly. The Council recognized this as a rational compromise, allowing humans to maintain their security while removing the threat of self-annihilation. Lotharo chirped softly.
But wouldn't they have eventually built such defenses anyway?
They likely would, Zora acknowledged. But the timeline was accelerated by centuries, and more importantly, the redirection of human aggression catalyzed an unprecedented era of cooperation on Earth. Wars between human nations virtually ceased for nearly a century following first contact. The display showed images of Earth cities evolving, gleaming towers rising, clean energy infrastructure spreading across continents. Freed from resource drain of constant military competition, human civilization advanced rapidly. The same innovative drive that had created weapons now focused on space weapons, and eventually space flight. When humans finally constructed their first interstellar vessels, Earth was already one of the best defended planets in the galaxy, its orbital grid having evolved through several generations of improvements. Kratir's scaled brow furrowed. But wouldn't they have been shocked to discover the galaxy was mostly peaceful after their history?
Indeed they were, Zora confirmed. Humans had assumed other species would share their aggressive tendencies. Instead, they discovered most civilizations in the Council had evolved through cooperation rather than competition. Many species had never developed projectile weapons at all, finding them barbaric and inefficient. The professor gestured to the hologram as it showed the first human diplomatic missions to various Council worlds. The humans appeared tense, heavily armored compared to the more relaxed representatives of other species. The humans were surprised to learn that large-scale warfare was exceedingly rare in galactic history. Most disputes were resolved through negotiation, resource-sharing agreements, or at worst, limited ritual combat between designated champions. The concept of total war, mobilizing entire civilizations for conflict, was considered a sign of primitive development. Zora paced slowly before the hologram, which now showed human ships alongside vessels of different designs. This created an interesting dilemma for the Council. Here was a species that had demonstrated remarkable strength and resilience, that possessed a highly developed military doctrine, and that maintained defensive capabilities far beyond what most peaceful species considered necessary. What role should humans play in galactic society? The professor's claws tapped thoughtfully against the floor. The answer came from an unexpected quarter. Several elder species proposed that humans be offered a role as galactic enforcers, a position traditionally rotated among a handful of the more martially inclined council members. Suli's feathers ruffled with surprise.
They trusted humans with enforcement after learning their history?
Trust is perhaps the wrong word, Zora replied. It was a pragmatic decision. Developing and maintaining weapons technology is extremely costly, both in resources and psychological well-being. Most species found the role burdensome and were eager to relinquish it. Humans, with their history of weapons development and their apparent psychological comfort with maintained readiness, seemed uniquely suited to the task. The hologram showed human ships increasingly incorporated in Council defense forces, their designs distinct but integrated into larger fleets. And humans accepted this role eagerly. It gave purpose to their martial tendencies while providing a constructive outlet for their competitive instincts. Earth's orbital defenses became a template for similar systems protecting vulnerable Council worlds. Human military doctrines were studied and adapted to meet the needs of interstellar peacekeeping. Zora paused, allowing his students to absorb this information before continuing with the next phase of human history. However, theory is one thing, practice is another, Zora continued, his tone growing more serious. Approximately 80 years after humans joined the Council, the true test of their new role arrived. The Retzar Empire, a non-Council species from the Galactic Rim, launched a series of aggressive expansions into Council territory. The holographic display shifted to show a star map with expanding tendrils of red pushing into the green-colored Council space. Sleek, predatory ships with angular designs appeared, the Retzar battle fleet. The Retzar had observed Council activities for decades and concluded, not incorrectly, that most member species had grown complacent in their pacifism. What they failed to account for was humanity's role as the Council's martial arm. Grada leaned forward, her spotted fur bristling with interest.
Was this the first real war in Council history?
The first in nearly a millennium, Zora confirmed.
and many council species viewed it with a certain ambivalence. The hologram displayed scenes of council deliberations, with various species engaged in heated discussion. Some council members feared that humans, if deprived of external threats for too long, might turn their weapons inward again, or worse, against their allies. The Retzar conflict was seen by some as a fortuitous test of humanity's restraint and loyalty. Kretir's scales rippled with surprise. They were glad to be attacked? Not glad, Zohar clarified. But there was relief that humanity's warrior instincts would have a legitimate outlet. The cycle of innovation through conflict that characterized human history continued, but now directed externally rather than against themselves. The display showed a timeline of the Retzar conflicts, a series of battles spanning nearly 2 decades. Human ships featured prominently in most engagements. The war unfolded across multiple fronts. Humans suffered defeats in the Pro-Kion and Sirius sectors, but achieved decisive victories at Tau Ceti and the Arcturus junction. Throughout the conflict, human weapons technology evolved rapidly. Adaptive shield harmonics, phase-shifted targeting systems, and eventually the gravitational compression weapons that finally forced the Retzar to sue for peace. The hologram shifted to display the aftermath of a particularly significant battle at the Denab front. The sleek, predatory Retzar vessels lay disabled and drifting, while human ships, battered but functional, moved among them, extracting survivors. What most impressed the Council was not merely humanity's martial prowess, but their adherence to the Council's ethical protocols, even in the heat of battle, Zohar explained. Rather than obliterating defeated enemies as their ancestors might have done, humans consistently prioritized rescue operations for disabled Retzar vessels. This restraint, more than any tactical brilliance, cemented humanity's position within the Council. The display shifted again to show diplomatic proceedings after the war's conclusion. Human representatives stood alongside other Council species, facing a delegation of subdued Retzar officials. The peace terms were remarkably lenient by historical human standards. Zohar continued. No reparations were demanded, no territories permanently seized. The Retzar were even offered eventual council membership after a probationary period. Lotharo's crest raised with interest.
So humans were still driven by conflict to innovate?
Yes, Zohar said. What changed was not their nature, but the context. Human history on Earth had been defined by violence. Now their combative instincts were channeled toward external threats, while their relationship with other Council species became increasingly symbiotic. The hologram showed diverse alien shipyards constructing components later integrated into human vessels. Then it displayed mixed crews of humans and other species working together on massive ships. Rather than fearing humanity would turn against them, Council species became integral parts of what you might call humanity's war machine. Many specialized in producing components for human-designed defensive systems. Others provided navigational expertise, medical support, or resource logistics. The professor moved closer to the display, which now showed the current state of Council space, peaceful, prosperous, and well-defended. In my analysis, this arrangement had benefited all parties. Council species maintained their independence and cultural focus on peaceful pursuits, while contributing specialized technologies to joint defense. Humans channel their aggressive instincts toward legitimate threats rather than each other, and the Council as a whole enjoys a level of security unknown in previous eras. The hologram faded, returning the classroom to its normal lighting. Zohar turned to face his students directly. Before we conclude today, are there any final questions about humanity's relationship with violence? Grada raised her hand first.
Professor,
Do you believe humans would have eventually outgrown their violent tendencies without council intervention? Zora considered this thoughtfully. There were promising signs of evolution in that direction before contact. Several human nations had maintained decades of peace and developed substantial cooperation frameworks. However, the transition might have taken centuries longer and cost many more lives. Contact accelerated a process already underway rather than creating something entirely new. Kretir was next.
Do humans ever express regret for their violent history?
They do, Zora replied. Human cultural works are filled with lamentations about their past atrocities and warnings against repeating them, yet they also recognize that this history shaped them in ways that made them uniquely valuable to the Council. Lotharo chirped softly.
Are there still weapons on Earth itself?
Limited ones, Zora said. Primarily for sporting purposes or security functions. The planetary defense grid makes conventional planetary weapons largely redundant. Earth itself has been missile-free for generations now. Suli tilted her head curiously.
Do you think other species could have fulfilled humanity's current role?
I think that it's unlikely, Zora responded. Few species have humanity's combination of traits, their comfort with maintained readiness, their ability to innovate under pressure, and, paradoxically, their deep desire for peace, born from intimate knowledge of war's cost. These seemingly contradictory qualities make them uniquely suited to their current position. As the session ended, students began gathering their belongings. Several approached Zora on the way out. I understand humans better now, Grada said, her spotted tail swishing thoughtfully. Their violence wasn't senseless. It was an adaptation to their circumstances.
They're still terrifying,
Kretir admitted, his scales shifting color slightly.
But I can see how they found their place in the galaxy.
Lotharo and Suli also chirped their appreciation in unison before departing. When the last student had gone, Zora stood alone in the classroom, satisfied with the session but thoughtful. He tapped his wrist device, bringing up his notes for the next lecture. Remember, he had told them as they left, today we've examined humanity only through the lens of conflict. Next time, we'll explore another fascinating aspect of their development, their unique ability to tame both plants and animals, reshaping entire ecosystems to serve their needs. This knowledge, when applied to other worlds, had transformed countless planets across our galaxy. The professor dimmed the lights and closed the door behind him. Humanity's story was far more complex than violence alone, though understanding their relationship with conflict was essential to appreciating the remarkable species they had become.